The bouncer's voice cut through the restaurant vestibule like a blade meant for an audience. Hey, hey you, what do you think you're doing in here? The words were loud enough to turn heads at the hostess stand, loud enough to make the couple waiting for their table step back, loud enough to accomplish exactly what Dominic Caruso intended. Public humiliation as performance art. The old man in the doorway did not flinch. He stood with a stillness that seemed out of place, his posture somehow straighter than his worn clothing would suggest. The coat he wore had been patched so many times the original color was a memory, and his boots were held together with duct tape wrapped precisely, almost militarily, around the cracked leather. But his hands, weathered and scarred across the knuckles, remained still at his sides. Not clenched, not raised, just still. I asked you a question. Dominic crossed the marble floor in 3 aggressive strides, positioning himself between the old man and the warm interior of Bellini's. His black suit was immaculate, his shoulders squared in a way that suggested he had practiced this confrontation in mirrors. You can't be in here. This is a private establishment. The old man's voice came soft, almost hoarse from disuse. Just looking for somewhere warm, sir. Cold night out there. Dominic laughed, and the sound was theatrical, designed to carry. He turned his head slightly toward the waiting couple, making sure they witnessed his authority. You hear that? Cold night. Like I'm running a shelter here. He turned back to the old man, stepping closer, close enough that the smell of expensive cologne mixed with whatever scent clung to poverty. You see the sign out front? Bellini's, not the Salvation Army. The hostess behind her stand looked down at her reservation book, unwilling to witness what was unfolding. The couple waiting for their table pretended to study their phones. But everyone was listening. Everyone always listened when Dominic performed. I have money. The old man reached slowly into his coat pocket, and Dominic's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with more force than necessary. Don't. Dominic's grip tightened. Don't reach into your pockets in my restaurant. You understand? I don't know what you're carrying in there. The old man did not pull away, did not struggle. His eyes, pale gray and carrying something that Dominic was too self-absorbed to recognize, simply met the younger man's gaze with a patience that had been forged in places Dominic could not imagine. Just a few dollars, sir. Enough for coffee. That's all I'm asking. Coffee. Dominic released the wrist with a slight shove. Our coffee costs more than whatever you've got in that pocket. I promise you. He gestured broadly toward the door, performing for the invisible audience he always imagined was watching. Now turn around and walk out before I call the police. You're making my guests uncomfortable just standing there. The couple by the hostess stand did look uncomfortable, but not in the way Dominic assumed. The woman had pressed her lips together, and the man had stopped pretending to look at his phone. They were watching the old man now, watching the way he absorbed abuse like water running off stone. I apologize for any trouble, sir. The old man inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect so automatic it had clearly been practiced over decades. I'll go. He turned toward the door, and as he did, the sleeve of his coat shifted. Just for a moment. Just enough for the overhead light to catch something on his forearm. Ink, faded and weathered. Lines that might have been an arrowhead. Numbers that might have been coordinates. But Dominic was already turning away, already smoothing his jacket, already preparing his next comment for the waiting couple. Sorry about that, folks. He smiled the smile of a man who believed he had handled something important. We get them sometimes. Vagrants trying to warm up. Don't worry, I keep Bellini's safe. The woman looked past him toward the closing door. That man seemed, she paused, searching for the word. Polite. Dominic's smile faltered for just a moment. They're all polite until they're not. Trust me, I've been doing this for 6 years. I know the type, but he did not know. He could not possibly know, because outside, standing in the January cold with his breath forming clouds in the air, Raymond Vance touched the dog tags beneath his shirt. 2 sets of tags. His own, worn smooth from decades against his skin, and another set belonging to men who never made a home. His fingers lingered on the raised lettering he knew by touch alone. A young woman passing on the sidewalk looked at him with a particular expression people reserve for those they want to forget quickly. He did not blame her. He had spent 6 years making himself forgettable. 6 years since Maria had closed her eyes for the last time. 6 years since he had walked away from the VA hospital, from the treatment plan, from everyone who tried to help him. He had not wanted to be helped. He had wanted to disappear, and he had almost succeeded. The warmth of the restaurant vestibule was already fading from his bones, replaced by the familiar ache of January. His left temple throbbed where the shrapnel had entered in 1969, the old wound a barometer that never lied about cold weather. He pulled his coat tighter, the motion precise despite his circumstances, and began walking toward the bridge where he had made his home for the past 3 years. But something made him pause. Something made him turn back and look at the golden light spilling from Bellini's windows. He had walked past this restaurant hundreds of times. Something about it pulled at him, tugged at memories he could not quite access. The name, Bellini. It meant something. It connected to something buried so deep he could not reach it. Inside, Dominic was laughing with the hostess about close calls and keeping standards. He had already forgotten the old man in the worn coat, already moved on to the next moment of his small, cruel life. But in exactly 40 minutes, Dominic would be on his knees. His hands would be shaking. His voice would be cracked and broken, and he would be begging forgiveness from the man he had just thrown into the cold. Because some old men in worn coats are just what they appear to be. And some old men in worn coats are ghosts. Legends. Men whose names are whispered in places where warriors are made. Raymond Vance was the second kind, and his story was about to collide with the son of a man whose life he had saved half a century ago. If you are watching this story from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below telling us your city or country. Stories of hidden heroes like this one happen in every community, maybe even yours. You might have passed a quiet legend on the street today without ever knowing it. If stories about courage, sacrifice, and second chances speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us. Now, let us continue. The cold hit him like a memory. January cold. Jungle cold. The kind of cold that seeped through everything and reminded a man that warmth was never guaranteed. Raymond pulled his coat tighter and let his feet carry him toward the bridge, but his mind was already drifting backward, pulled by the same current that always took him when the temperature dropped like this. January 1969. The Aishao Valley, a place that existed on maps, but felt like it belonged to another world entirely. The helicopter had been burning. Raymond could still smell it if he let himself. That particular mixture of aviation fuel and jungle rot, and something else, something that smelled like the end of everything. They had taken fire coming over the ridge, the pilot dead before he could even call Mayday, the co-pilot trying to auto-rotate them down through a canopy that did not want to let them pass. The crash had scattered them across 100 meters of elephant grass, and when Raymond had pulled himself from the wreckage, his ears ringing and his left temple bleeding for where the shrapnel had kissed his skull, he had heard the screaming. Not enemy fire. Not yet. Just a young medic named Antonio Bellini, his leg twisted at an angle that meant he was not walking out of this valley. Not without help. Raymond's feet found a familiar path down the embankment toward the bridge without his conscious direction. His body knew this route the way it knew how to breathe. 3 years of walking the same steps. 3 years of sleeping in the same spot beneath the concrete overhang where the highway crossed the river. The city had tried to move him twice, and twice he had returned. This was his place now, the place where he waited for something he could not name. In the jungle, there had been no waiting. There had been only movement, only the next step and the next breath and the weight of Antonio Bellini across his shoulders. 12 miles. That was what the after-action report would eventually say, though Raymond had never read it. 12 miles through enemy territory with a wounded man who could not walk and would not stop talking. Antonio had been delirious with pain and blood loss, his voice a constant whisper against Raymond's ear as he carried him through the darkness. My wife, Antonio had said over and over, "My wife is pregnant. We're going to open a restaurant. Italian food. Real Italian food. Not the garbage they serve stateside. She's going to cook, and I'm going to run the front." We picked out the name already. Bellini. Like her family. Like the drink. People will come from everywhere. Raymond had not answered. He had been too focused on the next step, the next shadow, the next sound that might mean contact. But he had listened. He had absorbed every word like a prayer, letting Antonio's dreams become the rhythm that kept his legs moving through mud and roots and darkness. "You have to get me home," Antonio had whispered. "I have to meet my son. I know it is a son. I can feel it. You have to get me home to meet my son." And Raymond had made a promise. The kind of promise a man makes in the jungle when death is breathing down his neck, and the only thing keeping him upright is the weight of another man's life on his shoulders. "I will get you home. I swear it." The bridge appeared before him, the concrete pillars rising like monuments in the darkness. Raymond ducked beneath the overpass and found his spot, the place where two support beams created a corner that blocked the wind. His bedroll was where he had left it, tucked behind a piece of plywood he had salvaged from a construction site. He lowered himself onto the thin padding and leaned his back against the cold concrete. The city sounds filtered down to him, cars passing overhead, a distant siren, the river muttering against its banks. These were the sounds of his life now, the sounds of a man who had stopped trying to be found. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the photograph. The edges were soft from handling, the image faded but still clear enough. Maria, taken on their wedding day, her smile so bright it hurt to look at even now. She had been gone for 6 years, and the wound was still fresh enough to bleed when he touched it. Cancer had taken her slowly, giving him time to watch her disappear piece by piece. He had held her hand at the end, in the hospice room that smelled of antiseptic and endings. Her last words had been a command, delivered with the same stubbornness that had made him fall in love with her 40 years earlier. "Live," she had said. "Promise me you will live." He had promised, and then he had broken that promise every day for 6 years. Because living required something he no longer possessed. Living required believing he deserved to take up space in a world that had taken her from him. The VA had tried. Social workers had tried. Old friend from the unit had tried. Raymond had walked away from all of them, shedding his former life like a snake shedding skin. He had wanted to disappear, and he had almost succeeded. Almost. But something kept pulling him back to that restaurant, to Bellini's. The name echoed in his memory like a song he had once known, but could not quite remember. Antonio had talked about it constantly during those 12 miles, had described the menu, the decor, the location he and his wife had scouted, had painted such a vivid picture that Raymond could almost see it. And now, 55 years later, there was a restaurant called Bellini's 3 blocks from Raymond's Bridge. It could be coincidence. It probably was coincidence. There must be hundreds of Italian restaurants with that name across the country. But Raymond kept walking past it anyway, kept looking through those golden windows at the warmth inside, kept wondering if maybe, just maybe, the young medic whose life he had saved had built his dream after all. He had never gone inside to ask, had never approached anyone who worked there. What would he say? "I carried a man named Antonio Bellini through 12 miles of jungle in 1969, and I was wondering if he ever opened his restaurant." They would think he was crazy. Another homeless veteran with scrambled memories and impossible stories. So he watched from a distance, and he wondered, and he let the not knowing become another weight he carried, lighter than some, heavier than others. Maria smiled up at him from the photograph, frozen forever in that moment of joy. He traced her face with his thumb, feeling the familiar ache spread through his chest. Still here, he whispered to her image. Still trying. But he was not sure that was true anymore. He was not sure he was trying at all. He was existing. He was enduring. He was putting one foot in front of the other because his body did not know how to stop. But trying required hope, and hope had been buried with Maria in a cemetery across town that he visited every morning before the groundskeepers arrived. The cold pressed against him, and he closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would walk past Bellini's again. Tomorrow he would feel that strange pull toward golden windows and a name that meant something he could not quite grasp. Tomorrow he would wonder about a young medic who had dreamed of Italian food and fatherhood while bleeding out on a sergeant's shoulders. But tonight he would sleep, and if he was lucky, He would dream of Maria, of her voice, of the life they had built together before the end. And if he was unlucky, he would dream of the jungle, of the weight across his shoulders, of a promise made in darkness that he had kept against all odds. I will get you home. I swear it. He had kept that promise. Antonio Bellini had survived. Raymond had carried him to the extraction point and loaded him onto the medevac helicopter and watched him rise into the sky toward a future that included a pregnant wife and a restaurant dream and a son he had been so certain was waiting for him. Raymond had never seen him again, had never known if the dream had come true, had never asked, because asking meant caring, and caring meant connection, and connection meant loss. But the name kept pulling at him. Bellini. Like a thread he could not stop touching. Like a wound that would not heal. 3 blocks away, in a restaurant that bore his father's name, Vincent Bellini was closing out the night's receipts, unaware that the man his father had spent 40 years searching for was sleeping under a bridge within walking distance. Unaware that the ghost from his father's stories was real and broken and waiting for something he could not name. The collision was coming. It had been coming for 55 years. And when it finally arrived, nothing would ever be the same. The next evening arrived with the kind of bitter wind that cut through clothing like it was not there. Raymond had spent the morning at Maria's grave, clearing frost from the headstone with his bare hands, speaking to her in whispers that the groundskeepers never heard. He had told her about the restaurant, about the bouncer, about the strange pull he felt toward a name that echoed across 55 years. She did not answer, of course. She never answered. But talking to her kept something alive in him that he was not ready to let die. Now he walked the familiar route toward Bellini's, his boots crunching against patches of ice on the sidewalk. He told himself he was just passing through, just taking the long way back to the bridge. But his feet slowed as the golden light of the restaurant came into view, and he found himself stopping across the street, watching through the windows at the warmth inside. The dinner rush was building. He could see servers moving between tables, carrying plates that steamed in the warm air. He could see couples leaning toward each other over candlelight. He could see families with children, businessmen with clients, all of them wrapped in the comfort of a place that welcomed them. He wondered if Antonio had ever stood in a place like this, had ever watched his dream take shape in wood and glass and linen tablecloths, had ever known that the man who carried him out of the jungle was still alive, still walking, still keeping promises even when there was no one left to keep them for. Hey, the voice came from behind him, sharp and familiar. I know you. Raymond turned slowly. Dominic Caruso stood on the sidewalk, his breath forming clouds in the cold air, his black coat buttoned against the wind. He must have been taking a break, or perhaps arriving for his shift. Either way, his eyes had found Raymond with the precision of a predator identifying prey. I told you yesterday, Dominic said, stepping closer. I told you to stay away from here. You deaf or just stupid? Raymond did not retreat. His feet stayed planted on the frozen sidewalk with a stillness that Dominic should have recognized as warning. Just walking, sir. Public sidewalk. Dominic laughed, the sound harsh in the evening air. A couple exiting the restaurant turned to look, their faces curious. Dominic noticed them and raised his voice, performing again. Public sidewalk, he repeated, mockery dripping from every syllable. You hear that? He's got rights. He turned back to Raymond, stepping closer still. You know what I think? I think you're casing the place. I think you're watching my restaurant, figuring out when to make your move. We've had break-ins before. Guys like you, desperate, nothing to lose. I'm not going to break into anything, Raymond said quietly. I just like to walk. Walk somewhere else. Dominic's hand shot out and grabbed Raymond's arm, the grip tight enough to leave bruises. His fingers closed around the worn fabric of the coat sleeve, and he pulled Raymond toward him with a force that spoke of gym memberships and protein shakes and a desperate need to prove physical dominance. I see you near my restaurant again. I'm calling the cops. You understand me? I'll have you arrested for harassment, for stalking, for whatever I need to say to make sure you disappear. The couple from the restaurant had stopped walking. They stood on the sidewalk watching, the woman's hand pressed against her mouth. A server had emerged from the side door, a young woman with dark hair, pulled back in a ponytail, her apron still tied around her waist. She was taking a cigarette break, but the cigarette remained unlit in her hand as she watched the confrontation unfold. Raymond looked down at Dominic's hand on his arm. The grip was painful, but pain was an old friend. Pain was a language he had spoken fluently for decades. What registered more than the discomfort was the position of Dominic's fingers, the way they had bunched the fabric of his sleeve, pushing it upward toward his elbow. "I understand, sir," Raymond said, his voice still soft, still controlled. "I will find another route." But Dominic was not finished. His audience had grown, and he was not ready to release them. "You'll find another route." He shook Raymond's arm for emphasis, and the sleeve rode higher. "You'll find another city is what you'll do. We don't need your kind around here. Bringing down property values, scaring customers, making decent people feel unsafe." The server with the unlit cigarette tilted her head. Something had caught her attention. Something on the old man's forearm, revealed by the pushed-up sleeve. Lines of ink, faded but still visible. An arrowhead shape, numbers beneath it, and something else, something that looked like initials arranged in a pattern she could not quite decipher. Her name was Elena, and she had worked at Bellini's for 3 years. She had seen Dominic perform his routine before, had watched him eject homeless men and women with theatrical cruelty that made her stomach turn. But something about this one was different. Something about the way he stood, the way he absorbed abuse without flinching, the way his eyes held steady on Dominic's face with an expression she could not name. "Let him go, Dominic." Her voice carried across the sidewalk. "He said he's leaving." Dominic turned his head, annoyance flashing across his features. "Mind your business, Elena. This doesn't concern you. You're making a scene." She dropped the unlit cigarette into her apron pocket and stepped closer. "People are watching. Let them watch." Dominic released Raymond's arm with a shove that sent him stumbling backward a step. "Let them see what happens to people who don't belong here." He straightened his coat, smoothing the fabric with hands that trembled slightly from adrenaline. "Get out of here, old man, and don't let me see your face again." Raymond steadied himself. His sleeve had fallen back into place, covering whatever Elena had glimpsed. He looked at her for a moment, and something passed between them. Not gratitude exactly. Something more complicated. Recognition of kindness in a world that had shown him very little of it. "Thank you," he said to her, the words almost too quiet to hear. Then he turned and walked away, his boots finding the rhythm of the sidewalk, his shoulders straight despite everything. The couple watched him go. Elena watched him go. Even Dominic watched him go, his chest still puffed with victory. But victory has a way of turning to ash. And Dominic did not see what Elena saw. He did not notice the way the old man moved, the economy of motion that suggested training rather than age. He did not wonder about the ink on the forearm, the markings that looked military rather than decorative. He did not think about what kind of man absorbs that level of abuse and walks away with his dignity intact. Elena thought about it. She thought about it as she watched the old man disappear around the corner. She thought about it as she went back inside to finish her shift. And later that night, when Vincent Bellini asked her about the commotion outside, she would tell him everything. The tattoo, she would say. There was something on his arm, an arrowhead and numbers. It looked like coordinates. And Vincent Bellini would go very still, because his father had told him stories about a man with exactly that kind of tattoo. A man who had carried him out of hell. A man named Spectre, who had vanished into the world and never been seen again. Until now, the jungle had a sound. Not silence, never silence, but a constant hum of life and death that pressed against a man's ears until he forgot what quiet meant. Raymond had learned to read that sound the way other men read newspapers. A shift in the insects meant movement. A break in the bird calls meant danger. And the labored breathing of a wounded man against his shoulder meant time was running out. Antonio Bellini had stopped talking about the restaurant. That was when Raymond knew things were getting worse. For the first 8 miles, Antonio had been a constant stream of words. The menu he and his wife had planned. The neighborhood they had scouted. The name they had chosen. He had described the red and white checkered tablecloths, the candles and wine bottles, the photographs of the old country that his wife's grandmother had carried across the ocean. He had painted such a detailed picture that Raymond could see it forming in the darkness around them, a vision of warmth and welcome that seemed impossibly far from the mud and blood of the A Shao Valley. But somewhere around mile 9, Antonio had gone quiet. His breathing had become shallow, his weight heavier against Raymond's shoulders. The tourniquet on his leg was holding, but blood loss was stealing him away one heartbeat at a time. "Stay with me," Raymond had whispered, adjusting his grip on Antonio's arm. "Talk to me about the restaurant. Tell me about your son." Antonio's response had come slow, each word an effort. "Vincent. We were going to name him Vincent. After her grandfather. He was a good man. Came to America with nothing. Built a life. That is what we are going to do. Build a life. You are going to meet him," Raymond had said, his legs burning as he pushed through another wall of elephant grass. "You are going to hold him in your arms and tell him about this night. About how you survived." Antonio had laughed, the sound wet and weak. "You think he will believe me? A stranger carried me 12 miles through the jungle. Sounds like a fairy tale. He will believe you because you will be there to tell him." Raymond had stepped over a fallen log, feeling the terrain slope downward toward the river he knew ran through this valley. The extraction point was on the other side. 3 more miles, maybe less. If they could reach the water, they could follow it to safety. "Sergeant," Antonio's voice had cracked. "If I do not make it, if you get out and I do not, will you find them? Will you tell them what happened?" Raymond had not answered immediately. He had been listening to the jungle, to the shift in sounds that might mean a patrol nearby. When he finally spoke, his voice had been harder than he intended. "You are going to make it," he had said. "I did not carry you this far to bury you within sight of home. Now stay awake and keep talking. Tell me about Vincent." Present day. Raymond sat beneath the bridge, his back against the cold concrete, his eyes fixed on the small fire he had built in a rusted barrel. The flames cast dancing shadows across the support beams, and for a moment, the patterns looked like jungle canopy, like leaves shifting in a wind that existed only in memory. He had kept his promise. Antonio had survived the extraction, had been loaded onto the medevac helicopter with a blood pressure so low the medics had not expected him to make it to the field hospital. But he had made it. Raymond had learned that much before his unit moved on to the next mission, the next valley, the next set of coordinates that would be classified for decades. What he had never learned was what came after. Had Antonio recovered fully? Had he returned to his pregnant wife? Had Vincent been born healthy, grown up strong, inherited his father's dreams? Raymond had told himself it did not matter. Had told himself that the promise ended at the extraction point, that once Antonio was on that helicopter, the obligation was fulfilled. But promises made in the jungle had a way of following a man through the years, and this one had followed Raymond across continents and decades, and a lifetime of other missions that blurred together in his memory. Bellini. The name had surfaced in his mind 3 years ago, when he had first wandered past the restaurant. He had stopped on the sidewalk, staring at the sign, feeling something shift in his chest that he could not identify. It could be coincidence. Italian restaurants with family names were common enough. The odds that this particular Bellini was connected to a wounded medic from 1969 were astronomical. But Raymond had survived too much to believe entirely in coincidence. And so he had kept walking past, kept watching through the windows, kept wondering if the dream Antonio had described in such vivid detail had somehow become real. He reached into his pocket and withdrew his journal, the leather cover soft from years of handling. Inside were names, hundreds of names, written in his careful hand, organized by year and location. Every soldier he had brought home, every life he had carried out of darkness. Antonio Bellini was on page 17, third name from the top, followed by a set of coordinates and a single word: survived. Raymond traced the name with his finger. The ink had faded over the years, but the letters were still legible, still proof that the memory was real, that the weight across his shoulders had belonged to a man with dreams and hopes, and a son named Vincent who was supposed to inherit them all. Beneath the name, Raymond had written something else, a promise he had never fulfilled. Find them. Tell her what happened. Antonio had asked him to do this, had extracted that promise in the darkness between Mile 9 and Mile 10, when death had seemed close enough to touch. And Raymond had nodded, had whispered his agreement, had added this promise to the one about getting Antonio home. He had kept the first promise. He had broken the second. 55 years of silence. 55 years of wondering without asking. 55 years of telling himself that Antonio's family did not need a ghost from the jungle showing up on their doorstep, reopening wounds that had surely healed long ago. But the wounds had not healed. Raymond knew that now. His own wounds had never healed, and he suspected Antonio's had not either. The jungle followed men home. It lived in the spaces between heartbeats, in the sounds that woke them at 3 in the morning, in the faces of the dead that appeared whenever they closed their eyes. He closed the journal and returned it to his pocket. The fire was dying, the flames reduced to embers that glowed orange in the darkness. Somewhere above him, cars passed on the highway, their headlights sweeping across the concrete in brief arcs of light. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would walk past the restaurant again, and maybe this time he would find the courage to ask, to walk through those golden doors and speak to whoever ran the place, and finally learn if the dream had survived. Or maybe he would not. Maybe he would keep walking, keep watching, keep carrying the weight of a broken promise until it finally crushed him. Either way, the collision was coming. The threads that had been woven in 1969 were finally pulling tight, and Raymond Vance, callsign Spectre, was about to learn that some promises are kept not by the ones who made them, but by the ones who inherit them. The following evening brought a cold rain that turned the streets into mirrors of reflected light. Raymond walked with his head down, his collar pulled up against the wet, his boots splashing through puddles that soaked through the duct tape patches. He had not intended to come this way, had told himself he would take a different route, avoid the confrontation, spare himself another encounter with the bouncer who seemed to have made hating him a personal mission. But his feet had carried him here anyway. They always did. He stopped across the street from Bellini's, sheltering under the awning of a closed shoe repair shop. The rain drummed against the canvas above him, a rhythm that reminded him of monsoon seasons in places he tried not to remember. Through the restaurant windows, he could see the warm glow of dinner service, the movement of servers between tables, the condensation on the glass that softened everything into impressionist paintings of comfort and belonging. He should leave. Dominic would be watching for him. The threat of police had been real enough, and Raymond had no desire to spend the night in a holding cell, explaining his presence to officers who would see only what Dominic saw. A vagrant, a nuisance, a problem to be solved through removal. But the cold had seeped into his bones over the past hour, and the rain showed no sign of stopping. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like Antonio Bellini kept whispering about warmth and welcome and red checker tablecloths. The side door of the restaurant opened. Elena emerged, pulling a jacket over her server's uniform, a cigarette already between her lips. She stood under the small overhang, cupping her hands around a lighter, and when she looked up from the flame, her eyes found Raymond across the street. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain fell between them like a curtain, and Raymond prepared himself to turn away, to disappear into the night before she could call for Dominic. But Elena did something he did not expect. She waved him over. Raymond hesitated. This could be a trap, a way to lure him closer so Dominic could make good on his threats. But something in Elena's expression suggested otherwise. Something that looked almost like concern. He crossed the street slowly, his boots sending ripples through the puddles that had formed on the asphalt. Elena watched him approach, her cigarette sending thin streams of smoke into the rain. "You look half frozen," she said when he reached the overhang. Her voice was matter-of-fact, neither pitying nor harsh. "How long have you been standing out there?" "Not long." Raymond's voice came rough, his throat tight from the cold. "Just passing through." Elena studied him for a moment. The same look she had given him the night before, when Dominic had grabbed his arm and pushed up his sleeve. The look of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Wait here," she said, and disappeared back through the side door. Raymond should have left. Every instinct told him to walk away before this kindness turned into something else. But the cold had dulled his instincts, and the warmth leaking from the cracked door felt like mercy, and so he stood there in the rain and waited. Elena returned 2 minutes later, carrying a paper cup with steam rising from the top. "Coffee," she said, pressing it into his hands. "It's the good stuff, not the burnt dregs we give customers at the end of the night." Raymond wrapped his fingers around the cup, feeling the heat seep into his skin. He could not remember the last time someone had given him something without expecting something in return. The sensation was foreign enough to make his throat tighten. "Thank you," he managed. "You did not have to do this." Elena shrugged, taking a drag from her cigarette. "Nobody has to do anything. That's what makes it matter when they do." She exhaled smoke into the rain. "I saw what Dominic did to you last night, and the night before. He's a bully. Always has been. He is doing his job." Raymond sipped the coffee, letting the warmth spread through his chest. "Keeping the restaurant safe." Elena laughed, to sound bitter. "He's keeping his ego safe. There's a difference." She looked at Raymond again, that searching expression returning. "Can I ask you something?" Raymond did not answer, which Elena seemed to take as permission. "That tattoo on your arm, the one I saw when he grabbed you. What is it?" Raymond's hand tightened on the coffee cup. The question had been inevitable, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent a jolt through his system. "Old memories," he said carefully. "From a long time ago." "Military?" Elena's voice had softened. "My grandfather was Army. He had tattoos like that. Coordinates and dates. Places he'd been." Raymond looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She was younger than he had initially thought, maybe late 20s, with dark eyes that held more depth than her casual demeanor suggested. There was something in her face that reminded him of the nurses at the VA hospital, the ones who had tried so hard to help him before he pushed them all away. "Yes," he said finally. "Military." Elena nodded slowly. "I thought so. The way you stand. The way you took everything Dominic threw at you without flinching. My grandfather was like that. Quiet, strong, carried everything inside where nobody could see it." The side door burst open, and Dominic's voice shattered the moment like glass. "Elena." His tone was sharp with authority and something else. Anger at finding her here, in conversation with the enemy. "What the hell are you doing?" "Taking a break." Elena's voice went flat, defensive. "It's allowed." Dominic stepped through the door, his eyes finding Raymond with predatory focus. The coffee cup, Elena's proximity, the evidence of kindness that contradicted everything he had established. "You." His finger jabbed toward Raymond. "I told you what would happen if I saw you again." "He was just walking by," Elena said. "I offered him coffee. It's freezing out here." Dominic turned on her, his face reddening. "You offered him coffee? With what authority? You don't get to decide who we serve, Elena. That's not your job. My job is to be a decent human being." Elena's voice rose to match his. "Something you wouldn't understand." Dominic's hand shot out and grabbed Raymond's arm, the same arm he had grabbed before in the same spot. The coffee cup fell from Raymond's grip, splattering across the wet concrete like spilled blood. Dominic yanked Raymond toward him, his other hand closing around the collar of the worn coat. "I warned you," Dominic snarled into Raymond's face. "I gave you every chance, and you just keep coming back. You just keep pushing." The motion had pulled Raymond's sleeve up again, higher this time. Elena could see the full tattoo now, not just glimpses. The arrowhead shape of the Special Forces insignia. The coordinates beneath it, precise numbers that meant nothing to her, but clearly meant everything to the man who wore them. And below that, a list of initials. 8 sets of letters, arranged in 2 columns, each one followed by a date. The initials of the men he had lost. The dates they had died. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had seen tattoos like this in her grandfather's photographs, in the memorial books he kept on a shelf. These were not decorations. These were monuments. Permanent records of sacrifice, carved into flesh, because paper could be lost but skin remained. "Dominic," she said, her voice changed now, urgent. "Dominic, let him go." But Dominic was not listening. He was already pulling Raymond toward the street, already planning to make an example of him, Already composing the story, he would tell about how he had protected Bellini's from the vagrant who would not stay away. He did not see what Elena saw. He did not understand what he was holding in his hands. And he did not notice the kitchen door opening behind them, or the figure who emerged to watch the commotion with growing concern. Marcus, the dishwasher, had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Marines. He knew what Special Forces tattoos looked like. He knew what those coordinates meant. And he knew, with sudden and absolute certainty, that Dominic had just made the worst mistake of his life. Marcus stepped out into the rain, his dishwasher's apron still tied around his waist, his eyes locked on the scene unfolding beneath the overhang. He had seen plenty of confrontations during his 3 years at Bellini's. Dominic seemed to collect them the way other men collected watches or baseball cards. But this one was different. This one had just revealed something that made Marcus's blood run cold. The tattoo on the old man's forearm was not decoration. Marcus had spent enough time around operators to recognize the style. The coordinates were mission-specific, burned into skin as permanent record of places that would never appear in official histories. The arrowhead was 5th Special Forces Group, Vietnam era, and those initials beneath, arranged like headstones in a cemetery, told a story of loss that only men who had carried similar weight could understand. Dominic. Marcus kept his voice level, the way he had learned to do when situations required de-escalation rather than force. Let him go. Dominic turned his head, irritation flashing across his features. Stay out of this, Marcus. Go back to your dishes. Marcus did not move. He had faced insurgents in Helmand Province. He had walked patrol routes lined with IEDs. An angry bouncer with a gym membership did not register on his threat scale. But the old man being dragged toward the street, the one with eyes that had seen things Dominic could not imagine, that man registered on a different scale entirely. "I am asking you nicely," Marcus said. "Let him go. And I'm telling you to mind your business." Dominic's grip tightened on Raymond's collar. "This vagrant has been harassing our customers. He's been warned multiple times. This is what happens when people don't listen." Raymond had not struggled, had not raised his hands, had not done anything except stand with that stillness that Marcus recognized for men who had learned to control their bodies in situations where control meant survival. The old man could have broken Dominic's grip. Marcus was certain of that now. The way he stood, the way he held his weight, the way his eyes tracked Dominic's movements with tactical precision. This was not a helpless vagrant being manhandled by a bully. This was a predator allowing himself to be handled because he had decided, for reasons of his own, not to fight back. That restraint told Marcus more than any tattoo could. Elena stepped forward, positioning herself between Dominic and the street. "You're making a scene," she said. "Customers can see through the windows. Mr. Bellini is going to hear about this." The name hit Dominic like cold water. His grip loosened slightly, his eyes darting toward the restaurant's front windows where faces had indeed gathered to watch the commotion. Vincent Bellini ran a tight operation, and public disturbances were not part of the image he cultivated. "Fine." Dominic released Raymond with a shove that sent him stumbling backward into the rain. "But this is not over." He jabbed a finger toward Raymond's chest. "I see you again, anywhere near this restaurant, and I will have you arrested. I will press charges. I will make sure you spend the next 6 months in a cell. You understand me?" Raymond straightened slowly. The rain plastered his gray hair to his forehead, and the cold had brought color to his weathered cheeks. He looked at Dominic with an expression that held no anger, no resentment, no fear. Just a weariness that seemed to extend beyond this moment into decades of accumulated sorrow. "I understand, sir," he said quietly. And then, to Elena and Marcus, "Thank you. Both of you." He turned and walked away, his boots splashing through puddles, his silhouette growing smaller as the rain swallowed him. Elena watched him go with her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Marcus watched him go with a growing certainty that something significant had just slipped through their fingers. Dominic smoothed his wet hair back from his forehead. "That's handled," he said, satisfaction creeping into his voice. "Some people just need to learn their place." He walked back inside without another word, leaving Elena and Marcus standing in the rain. That man was Special Forces, Marcus said quietly. The tattoo. I recognize the unit insignia. 5th Group. Vietnam. Elena turned to look at him. Are you sure? I'm sure. Marcus's jaw tightened. Those coordinates on his arm. Those aren't random numbers. Those are mission locations. Places where things happened that never made it into newspapers. And those initials underneath. Those are men he lost. Men he's been carrying with him for 50 years. Elena felt something twist in her chest. The coffee she had given him. The brief conversation about her grandfather. The way he had said thank you like the word was unfamiliar in his mouth. She had known there was something different about him. She had not understood how different until now. We should tell Mr. Bellini, she said. About what happened. About who that man might be. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, we should. They found Vincent Bellini in his office, reviewing the evening's reservations on his computer. He looked up when they entered, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his expression shifting from concentration to concern as he registered their wet clothes and serious faces. What happened? He asked, setting the glasses down. What did Dominic do now? Elena told him. She described the confrontation on the sidewalk, the grab, the shove, the threats. She described the coffee she had offered and the anger it had provoked. And then she described the tattoo, the arrowhead, the coordinates, the initials arranged like a memorial. Vincent's face changed as she spoke. The color drained from his cheeks, and his hands, which had been resting on the desk, began to tremble. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, staring at nothing. An arrowhead, he said finally, his voice strange and distant. 5th Special Forces, with coordinates underneath. Yes, sir. Elena glanced at Marcus. Marcus recognized it. He said it was Vietnam era. Vincent rose from his chair and crossed to the far wall of his office, where a collection of framed photographs hung in careful arrangement. He reached up and lifted one from its hook, a black and white image that had clearly been taken decades ago. He stared at it for a moment, then turned it around so Elena and Marcus could see. The photograph showed 2 men. One was young, lying on a stretcher, his leg wrapped in bloody bandages. He was smiling despite his injuries, his hand raised in a weak thumbs up. The other man was crouching beside the stretcher, his face partially obscured by shadow, but his forearm clearly visible in the frame. On that forearm was a tattoo, an arrowhead, and beneath it, coordinates that were too small to read, but clearly present. This is my father, Vincent said, his finger touching the man on the stretcher. Antonio Bellini. This picture was taken at a field hospital in Vietnam, January 1969. He was carried 12 miles through enemy territory by a Green Beret sergeant after their helicopter was shot down. His finger moved to the other man, the one with the tattoo. This is the man who saved his life. My father spent 40 years trying to find him. He died 3 years ago, still looking. Vincent set the photograph on the desk, his eyes wet with tears he was not trying to hide. His call sign was Spectre, he said. And if that man you just described is who I think he is, then Dominic just threw a legend into the rain. Raymond walked through the rain until his legs ached and his boots squelched with every step. He did not return to the bridge, could not face the cold concrete and the rusted barrel and the endless hours of darkness stretching before him. Instead, he walked the city streets like a ghost, passing through pools of streetlight and shadow, invisible to the few souls still out in the downpour. The coffee had been warm. That was what he kept returning to. Elena had given him coffee without asking for anything in return, had looked at him like a person instead of problem, had asked about his tattoo with curiosity rather than suspicion. And the dishwasher, the young man with military bearing who had stepped out of the kitchen, had understood something. Raymond had seen it in his eyes. Recognition not of a face, but of a type. One veteran seeing another across the gulf of generations. He stopped beneath an awning outside a closed hardware store and leaned against the brick wall. His chest was tight, and his breathing came harder than it should have. The cold had settled into his lungs, and the cough that followed bent him double. His hands braced against his knees as his body tried to expel air that felt like broken glass. When the fit passed, he straightened slowly and looked back in the direction he had come. Bellini's was 6 blocks behind him now, 6 blocks from the golden windows and the name that had haunted him for 3 years. 6 blocks from the truth he had been circling without ever finding the courage to grasp. Maria's voice came to him then, clear as if she were standing beside him in the rain. "What are you so afraid of, Raymond? What could they possibly tell you that would be worse than not knowing?" He closed his eyes. She had always been the brave one, the one who pushed when he wanted to retreat, the one who demanded answers when he preferred silence. She had dragged him to the VA when he resisted, had sat beside him in therapy sessions where he stared at the floor and said nothing, had held him through the nightmares and the cold sweats and the mornings when he could not remember why he should get out of bed. And then she had gotten sick, and he had watched her fight with everything she had. And when the fighting was over, when she had closed her eyes for the last time, he had discovered that her courage had not been contagious after all. Without her, he was just a tired old man who had run out of reasons to keep trying. But the coffee had been warm, and Elena had smiled at him. And somewhere in that restaurant, there might be answers to questions he had carried for 55 years. He could leave. That would be the smart choice. Find another city, another bridge, another place where Bellini's was just a name instead of a weight around his neck. Start over the way he had started over a dozen times since Maria died. Disappear into the vast anonymity of a country that produced homeless veterans faster than it could house them. Or he could stay. Raymond pulled the photograph from his pocket, sheltering it from the rain with his curved palm. Maria smiled up at him, frozen in that moment of joy that seemed to belong to another lifetime. He traced the familiar lines of her face, feeling the ache in his chest deepen. "What would you do?" he whispered to her image. "If you were me, if you had walked away from a promise and spent 55 years wondering if the man you saved ever got to hold his son." The rain continued to fall. Maria continued to smile. And somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed through the night like a cry for help that no one would answer. Raymond thought about Antonio Bellini, about the young medic who had talked nonstop for 8 miles, painting pictures of a future he might never see, about the silence that had fallen when blood loss stole his voice, about the promise extracted in darkness, the one Raymond had never kept. Find them. Tell them what happened. He had told himself it was not his place. Had told himself Antonio's family did not need a stranger appearing decades later to dredge up painful memories. Had told himself 100 different stories to justify his cowardice. But the truth was simpler and uglier than any of those excuses. He had been afraid. Afraid that Antonio had not survived after all. Afraid that the dream of the restaurant had died with him. Afraid that if he looked too closely at the aftermath of that night in the jungle, he would find only graves and grief and confirmation that carrying a man 12 miles through hell had been meaningless in the end. Easier not to know. Easier to wonder than to face the truth. But Maria had never accepted easier, had never let him hide from the hard things. And even now, even 6 years after her death, he could hear her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade through fog. "You carried him home, Raymond. You kept that promise. Now, keep the other one." He looked at the photograph one more time. Then he folded it carefully and returned it to his pocket, close to his heart where it had lived for 6 years. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would go back to Bellini's. Not to the side door, not to lurk in shadows hoping for warmth. He would walk through the front entrance. He would ask to speak with whoever owned the restaurant, and he would finally learn whether Antonio Bellini had built his dream or died trying. Either way, he would know. Either way, the wondering would end. He pushed off from a wall and began walking again, this time with direction. Back toward the bridge. Back toward his bedroll and his rusted barrel and the few possessions that constituted his entire life. The rain was letting up now, the clouds beginning to break apart overhead, and through the gaps he could see stars. Maria had loved stars, had made him learn the constellations during their early years together, lying on blankets in their backyard and tracing patterns in the sky. He had not looked up in years, had kept his eyes on the ground where they belonged, watching for the next step, the next obstacle, the next reason to keep moving. But tonight he looked up, and the stars looked back. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Raymond Vance felt something that might have been hope. It was small, fragile, easily extinguished by morning and the cold light of day. But it was there, burning in his chest alongside the ache and the grief and the weight of broken promises. Tomorrow, he told the stars. Tomorrow, he told Maria. Tomorrow, he told the ghost of a young medic who had dreamed of red checkered tablecloths and a son named Vincent. Tomorrow, I will stop running. The dinner rush at Bellini's was reaching its peak when Raymond pushed through the front door. He had cleaned himself as best he could at the public restroom in the park, scrubbing his face and hands with paper towels, combing his wet hair back with his fingers. His clothes were still worn, still patched, still marked by years of hard living. But his boots were wiped clean, and his posture was straight, and his eyes held a clarity that had been missing for longer than he could remember. The hostess looked up from her podium, and her smile faltered. She recognized him. Of course she did. Dominic had made sure everyone on staff knew about the vagrant who had been lurking outside. Her hand moved toward the phone on the stand, ready to summon security. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Raymond said quietly. "I just want to speak with the owner. Please, it is important." The hostess hesitated, her fingers hovering over the phone. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have a policy about solicitation." "I'm not soliciting anything." Raymond kept his voice level, his hands visible at his sides. "I knew someone once. A long time ago. Someone named Bellini. I just want to know if this restaurant has any connection to him." Something in his tone made the hostess pause. The desperation beneath the calm. The weight of years pressing down on every word. She glanced toward the dining room, toward the kitchen, toward anywhere that might offer guidance. That was when Dominic appeared. He emerged from the back hallway like a storm-gathering force, his face darkening as he registered who was standing in his lobby. The veins in his neck stood out against his collar, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You." The word came out like a curse. "I warned you. I told you exactly what would happen. I know what you told me." Raymond did not retreat, did not flinch. "I'm not here for you. I am here to speak with the owner. The owner does not want to speak with you." Dominic crossed the distance between them in 3 aggressive strides. "Nobody here wants to speak with you." What part of that is so hard to understand? The dining room had gone quiet. Forks suspended over plates. Conversations dying mid-sentence. Every eye in the restaurant turning toward the confrontation unfolding at the entrance. Among the diners, an older woman with silver hair and a dignified bearing set down her wine glass and studied the scene with growing interest. Senator Patricia Holloway had served as an Army nurse during Vietnam. She had treated soldiers at field hospitals throughout the war, had seen men carried in on stretchers with wounds that should have killed them, had watched some of them survive against all odds. She had learned, in those years, to recognize certain things. The way a man stood when he had been trained to stand. The way he held himself when pressure was applied. The way his eyes tracked movement with tactical awareness, even when his body remained still. The old man in the worn coat had all of those tells. And something else. Something that made her rise from her table and take a step toward the door. Dominic grabbed Raymond's arm, the same arm he had grabbed before, in the same spot that was already bruised from previous encounters. But this time, Raymond did not simply accept it. This time, his free hand came up and closed around Dominic's wrist with a grip that made the younger man gasp. "I have allowed you to put your hands on me 3 times, Raymond said, his voice quiet but carrying through the silent restaurant. "I will not allow a 4th. Release me, and I will wait peacefully for the owner. Continue, and I will remove your hand myself." Dominic's face went red, then white. He tried to pull free and found that he could not. The old man's grip was iron, unyielding, applied with a precision that spoke of decades of training. This was not the frail, vagrant Dominic had been bullying for days. This was something else entirely. "Let go of me," Dominic hissed. "I'll have you arrested for assault. You grabbed me first." Raymond's eyes never left Dominic's face. "There are witnesses, including, if I'm not mistaken, a United States Senator." Dominic's head whipped toward the dining room, where Senator Holloway was indeed watching with an expression of sharp interest. His grip on Raymond's arm loosened involuntarily, and Raymond released his wrist at the same moment, stepping back to create distance. The motion caused Raymond's sleeve to ride up. The tattoo was visible now to everyone in the lobby. The arrowhead, the coordinates, the initials of the fallen. Senator Holloway's breath caught in her throat. She had seen tattoos like that before, had seen them on men who came through her field hospital with wounds that defied survival, had seen them on the quiet ones, the ones who never talked about where they had been or what they had done, the ones whose files were marked classified in bold red letters. What unit? She asked, her voice cutting through the tension. The question was directed at Raymond, and it carried the authority of someone accustomed to being answered. Raymond turned to face her. His posture shifted subtly, unconsciously, the muscle memory of a lifetime responding to the tone of command. 5th Special Forces Group, ma'am. Ashau Valley, 1968 to 1970. Senator Holloway's hand rose to her chest. Dear God, she whispered. The kitchen door swung open, and Vincent Bellini stepped into the dining room. He had been in his office, reviewing the photograph, preparing to search for the man Elena and Marcus had described. But the commotion had drawn him out, and now he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the old man in the worn coat. The old man with the tattoo on his forearm. The old man with eyes that held 55 years of unspoken history. The old man who had just named the exact unit, the exact location, the exact time frame that his father had described in story after story throughout Vincent's entire childhood. Raymond saw him, saw the restaurant owner's face, saw something flicker in those eyes that looked suddenly, impossibly familiar. Your father, Raymond said, his voice cracking for the first time. His name was Antonio. He was a medic. He talked about opening a restaurant with his wife. He talked about his son. Vincent's knees buckled. He caught himself on a nearby table, sending silverware clattering to the floor. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Just a sound. A wounded sound that held 40 years of searching and 3 years of grief and the impossible hope that the ghost from his father's stories had finally come home. He talked about you, Raymond continued, his own eyes filling with tears he had not shed in years. Every step of those 12 miles. He talked about you. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Not the comfortable silence of a pause between courses, but the breathless silence of witnessing something that transcended ordinary experience. Forks remained suspended. Wine glasses hung in midair. Even the kitchen had gone still, the clatter of pots and pans fading into nothing as words spread through the staff. Vincent pushed himself upright, his hand still gripping the table for support. His face was wet with tears he had not felt falling. His voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. Spectre. The word hung in the air like a prayer, like an invocation, like the name of a saint whose existence had been legend until this very moment. Raymond flinched as if struck. He had not heard that call sign spoken aloud in decades, had not allowed himself to think of it, to remember the man who had earned it in jungles that no longer existed on any official map. But hearing it now, in this place, from the lips of a man who could only have learned it from one source, broke something loose in his chest. Your father told you, Raymond said. His voice had gone hoarse, rough with emotion he had spent years learning to suppress. He told you about that night. Vincent took a step forward, then another. He was moving like a man in a dream, afraid that sudden movement might shatter the vision before him. He told me everything, he said. Every detail. The helicopter crash. The 12 miles through the jungle. The promise you made him. Raymond's hand rose unconsciously to his chest, where the dog tags hung beneath his shirt. 2 sets. His own and another. He never knew. Raymond said. He never knew if you were real. He was so certain you were a boy. He kept saying it. I know it is a son. I can feel it. A sound escaped Vincent's throat. Half laugh, half sob. My mother said he cried when I was born. Cried and laughed, and kept saying he knew. He always knew. Senator Holloway had moved closer, her experienced eyes taking in details that others might miss. The way Raymond held himself. The scars visible on his hands. The particular quality of stillness that came only from years of operating in environments where stillness meant survival. "The coordinates on your arm," she said quietly. "What operation?" Raymond turned to face her, and something in his posture shifted. The broken homeless man receded, and something else emerged. Something harder. Something forged in places that existed only in classified files and the nightmares of those who had survived them. "January 17th, 1969, he said, his voice taking on the flat precision of an after-action report. "Extraction mission, Ashau Valley. Our helicopter took fire coming over the ridge. Pilot killed instantly. Co-pilot got us down, but we scattered on impact. I pulled myself from the wreckage and found a medic named Antonio Bellini with his leg torn open and a tourniquet that was barely holding. The restaurant remained frozen. Diners who had come for pasta and wine were now witnesses to history, to a story that had waited 55 years to be told in full. 12 miles to the extraction point, Raymond continued. Enemy patrols everywhere. No radio, no support, just two men and a promise. He looked at Vincent, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. He talked the whole way. For 8 miles, he would not stop talking. About your mother, about the restaurant they were going to open, about you, the son he had never met but already loved. Vincent covered his mouth with his hand. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Around mile 9, he went quiet. Raymond's voice cracked. Blood loss. Schalt. I thought I was going to lose him. I thought everything he had told me about, every dream, every hope was going to die in that jungle. So I made him talk, made him tell me more. Your name? Vincent, after your mother's grandfather. A good man who came to America with nothing and built a life. That is what we were going to do, Vincent whispered, finishing the sentence. Build a life. My father said that to me 1,000 times growing up. I never knew where it came from. It came from a jungle in Vietnam, Raymond said. It came from a man who refused to die because he had too much to live for. Senator Holloway stepped forward, her hand extended. Patricia Holloway, she said. I served as an Army nurse during Vietnam. I treated soldiers from operations like yours. Men who came in with wounds that should have killed them, carried out of impossible situations by men like you. Raymond shook her hand, his grip firm despite the tremor that ran through his fingers. There were a lot of us, ma'am. A lot of men carrying other men out of the dark. But not all of them carried their burden for 55 years. The senator's eyes moved to his chest, where the outline of dog tags was visible beneath his thin shirt. Not all of them kept the faith this long. Dominic had retreated to the edge of the lobby. His face was ashen, his earlier aggression completely evaporated. He watched the scene unfold with the dawning horror of a man who has just realized the magnitude of his mistake. The vagrant he had thrown into the rain. The old man he had mocked and threatened and physically handled. The target of his petty cruelty for the past 3 days. A legend. A hero. A man whose name was apparently known to a United States senator. Vincent crossed the final distance between them and stopped directly in front of Raymond. They were of similar height, though Vincent was broader, healthier, fed by decades of comfortable living that Raymond had never known. But in this moment, size meant nothing. History meant everything. My father looked for you, Vincent said, his voice breaking. For 40 years, he looked for you. He hired investigators. He wrote letters to the Army. He contacted every veterans organization he could find. He never stopped. Raymond closed his eyes. The weight of those words pressed down on him like physical force. I did not think you would want to be found, he said. I did not think any of you would want a ghost showing up on your doorstep, dragging the jungle back into your lives. Want you? Vincent's voice rose with disbelief. You carried him 12 miles through hell. You kept him alive when everything said he should have died. You gave him the chance to meet me, to raise me, to build everything you see around you. He gestured at the restaurant, at the walls covered with photographs, at the life that had grown from a dream whispered in darkness. This place exists because of you. I exist because of you. Raymond opened his eyes. Tears were streaming down his weathered face now, cutting tracks through the lines and creases that decades of hard living had carved. I made him a promise, he said. 2 promises. The first was to get him home. The second was to find your family and tell you what happened. I kept the first. I broke the second. For 55 years, I broke it. You are here now. Vincent reached out and gripped Raymond's shoulders, the touch gentle despite its firmness. You found us, or we found you. It does not matter which. What matters is that you are here. What matters is that my father's story finally has an ending. The restaurant erupted into sound. Applause at first scattered, then building until it filled the room like thunder. Diners who had been frozen in their seats were now standing, clapping, wiping tears from their own eyes. Elena had emerged from the back, her hand pressed to her heart. Marcus stood beside her, his posture rigid with military respect, his eyes glistening. And in the corner of the lobby, Dominic Caruso stood alone, watching the man he had tormented being embraced like a returning hero, and understanding for the first time in his life what it truly meant to be small. Vincent guided Raymond to a table near the window. The same window Raymond had stood outside so many times, watching the warmth within and wondering if Antonio's dream had survived. Now he was inside, seated in a chair that someone had pulled out for him, surrounded by faces that looked at him with something he had not seen directed at himself in years. Respect, gratitude, awe. A glass of water appeared before him. Then bread, warm from the oven. Then a bowl of soup that smelled like everything good he had forgotten existed. Elena set each item down with trembling hands, her eyes wet, her voice failing her when she tried to speak. Vincent sat across from him, close enough to touch, as if afraid that distance might cause Raymond to disappear again. The photograph from his office lay on the table between them. The black and white image of 2 young men, one wounded and smiling, one crouching in shadow with an arrowhead tattooed on his forearm. I have looked at this picture every day for 3 years, Vincent said. Every day since my father died. He left it to me specifically. Told me to keep looking. Told me you were still out there somewhere. Raymond picked up the photograph with hands that would not stop shaking. He remembered this moment. Remembered the field hospital, the chaos of wounded men and overwhelmed medics, the flash of a camera that someone had produced from somewhere. He had not known the picture existed, had not known that Antonio had carried it with him for decades like a talisman. He looks happy, Raymond said, his finger touching the image of Antonio's face. Despite everything, he looks happy. He was happy. Vincent's voice was thick with emotion. He was alive. He was going home. He was going to meet me. That was all that mattered to him. Senator Holloway had moved to a nearby table, close enough to listen, to bear witness. Her phone was in her hand, and Raymond could see her typing something, but her eyes kept returning to the scene before her, to the reunion that was unfolding like something from a story too improbable to be true. Tell me about him, Raymond said suddenly. Tell me about his life, about what happened after. Vincent smiled through his tears. Where do I even begin? He told Raymond everything. The recovery that had taken 18 months and left Antonio with a permanent limp. The wedding to Maria Bellini, held in a small church with only family present because Antonio could not afford anything more. The birth of Vincent 9 months later, precisely as Antonio had predicted. The years of working double shifts, saving every penny, building toward the dream that had kept him alive in the jungle. They opened the first Bellini's in 1977, Vincent said. A tiny place, 8 tables. My mother cooked, and my father worked the front, just like he had always planned. I grew up in that kitchen, learned to make pasta before I learned to ride a bike. Raymond listened with his eyes closed, letting the story wash over him like warm water. This was what he had been afraid to learn. This was what he had avoided for 55 years. Not tragedy, but triumph. Not grief, but joy. Antonio Bellini had lived, had built his dream, had raised his son, had done everything he had promised in those 12 miles of darkness. He talked about you, Vincent continued. All the time, every Veterans Day, every Memorial Day, every time someone asked about his limp. He told the story of the helicopter crash, the jungle, the man who carried him out. He called you Spectre because that was what the other soldiers called you. He said you moved through the jungle like a ghost. Said he never would have made it without you. Raymond opened his eyes. Did he ever tell you what I promised him? The second promise? Vincent nodded slowly. He told me. Find your family. Tell them what happened. He paused, his expression complicated. He never blamed you for not coming. He understood. Better than anyone, he understood what war does to men. How it makes some of them disappear into themselves. How some of them never find their way back. I wanted to come. Raymond's voice broke. Every year, I told myself this would be the year. And every year, I found a reason not to. Fear. Shame. The belief that I did not deserve to be part of your story after I had abandoned it for so long. You are part of our story. Vincent reached across the table and gripped Raymond's hand. You have always been part of our story. My father made sure of that. He pointed to the walls of the restaurant, and Raymond looked. Photographs. Dozens of them. Military photographs. Unit photographs. Photographs of young men in jungle fatigues, of helicopters against tropical skies, of medics treating wounded soldiers in the chaos of field hospitals. And in the center of them all, enlarged and framed in polished wood, was the same photograph that lay on the table. The wounded medic and the shadowed soldier. The beginning of everything. He built a shrine, Raymond whispered. He built a monument. Vincent's voice was fierce with pride. To you, to the men who served with him, to everyone who never came home. This restaurant is not just a business, Raymond. It is a memorial. Every person who eats here sees those photographs. Every person learns a little bit about what men like you sacrificed. Senator Holloway approached the table, her phone now pressed to her chest. Forgive me for interrupting, she said, but I need to ask you something, Mr. Vance. Raymond looked up at her, still disoriented by the use of his name. Yes, ma'am. Your service record. Do you know what happened to it? Raymond shook his head. I stopped dealing with the VA years ago. Lost my paperwork more times than I could count. Eventually just gave up trying. The senator nodded, her expression thoughtful. I made some calls. I have contacts at the Pentagon who handle historical records. She paused, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made Raymond's breath catch. Your file is classified, Mr. Vance. Most of it, anyway. But the parts that are not classified paint a picture of a career that should have been recognized decades ago. Raymond said nothing. He had never sought recognition, had never wanted medals or ceremonies or the attention that came with official acknowledgement. He had done his job. He had carried his brothers out of the dark. That was supposed to be enough. 3 silver stars, the senator continued quietly. 2 bronze stars with valor device. A purple heart with clusters. Recommended for the Medal of Honor twice. Both times downgraded because the operations were classified and could not be publicly acknowledged. Vincent stared at the senator, then at Raymond. His mouth opened and closed without sound. You are not just a hero, Mr. Vance. The senator's voice carried through the silent restaurant, reaching every ear, every witness, every person who would carry this story with them when they left. You are one of the most decorated soldiers of the Vietnam War, and you've been living under a bridge while the country you served forgot you existed. Raymond looked down at his hands, at the scars that crossed his knuckles, at the calluses that had never softened despite years without holding a weapon. He did not know what to say, did not know how to process the weight of recognition he had never sought and was not sure he deserved. I just carry my brothers home, he said finally. That is all I ever did. I just carry them home. The restaurant was silent, and in that silence, something shifted, not just in Raymond, but in everyone who heard him. A reminder that heroism was not about medals or recognition. It was about promises kept in darkness, about 12 miles of jungle with a dying man on your shoulders, about never giving up, even when giving up would have been easier, even when giving up would have been forgiven. Vincent squeezed Raymond's hand and did not let go. You carry my father home, he said, and now, finally, we get to carry you. The consequences came swiftly and without mercy. Vincent rose from the table and turned to face the lobby where Dominic still stood frozen against the wall. The restaurant owner's tears had dried, replaced by something harder, something that burned in his eyes like cold fire. Dominic. Vincent's voice carried across the silent room. Come here. Dominic's legs moved as if disconnected from his will. He crossed the dining room in halting steps, his face the color of old ash, his hands trembling at his sides. Every eye in the restaurant tracked his progress. Every witness to his cruelty now watched his reckoning approach. "Mr. Bellini." Dominic's voice cracked. "I did not know. I could not have known. You did not need to know." Vincent stood directly in front of him now, close enough that Dominic could see the fury barely contained beneath the surface. "You did not need to know he was a war hero to treat him with basic human dignity. You did not need to know he saved my father's life to refrain from throwing him into the rain like garbage. I was protecting the restaurant." Dominic's protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I was doing my job." "Your job." Vincent let the words hang in the air. "Your job was to keep our guests safe. Your job was never to humiliate the vulnerable, to mock the suffering, to physically assault a 74-year-old man because you enjoyed the power it gave you." Dominic opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. What could he say? The evidence of his cruelty had been witnessed by a dining room full of people, by a United States senator, by the very man whose father's life had been saved by the vagrant Dominic had treated worse than an animal. "You are fired." Vincent's voice held no anger now, only finality. "Collect your things and leave. Do not come back. Do not contact me. Do not use this restaurant as a reference. As far as I am concerned, you never worked here. Mr. Bellini, please." Dominic's composure crumbled completely. Tears spilled down his cheeks. "I have worked here for 6 years. This job is everything to me. Please, I am begging you. You should have thought about that before you put your hands on a man who carried my father out of hell." Vincent turned his back on Dominic, dismissing him completely. "Elena, please escort Mr. Caruso to the back to collect his belongings. Make sure he leaves through the service entrance." Elena stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral despite the satisfaction that flickered in her eyes. "This way, Dominic." Dominic looked around the dining room one last time, at the faces that watched him with contempt, at the senator who shook her head slowly, at Marcus, who stood with arms crossed and jaw set, blocking any possibility of appeal, and finally at Raymond, who sat at the table by the window with tears still wet on his weathered cheeks. "I am sorry." Dominic's whisper was barely audible. "I am so sorry." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. The man who had grabbed him, mocked him, thrown him into the cold. The man who had made 3 days of his life more miserable than they needed to be. The man who was now broken and weeping and begging for forgiveness. Raymond nodded once. Slowly, not absolution, but acknowledgement. "I hope you learned something from this," he said quietly. "I hope the next time you see someone suffering, you remember this moment. And I hope you choose differently." Dominic's face crumpled. He turned and followed Elena toward the back, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The dining room watched him go, and when the door closed behind him, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the space. Senator Holloway approached Vincent with her phone extended. "Mr. Bellini, I have taken the liberty of contacting several organizations that work with homeless veterans." She glanced at Raymond. "With your permission, Mr. Vance, I would like to make some arrangements." Raymond looked at her with uncertainty. "What kind of arrangements?" "Housing, for a start." The senator's voice was gentle but firm. "Medical care. Benefits you have been owed for decades. There are people who have dedicated their lives to helping veterans like you, Mr. Vance. People who would consider it an honor to assist. I do not need charity." The words came automatically, reflexively. The same words Raymond had spoken to social workers and VA representatives and everyone else who had tried to help him over the years. It is not charity. Vincent knelt beside Raymond's chair, bringing himself to eye level. "It is a debt my family has owed for 55 years. Please let us begin to repay it." Raymond looked at Vincent's face, at the eyes that held so much of Antonio in them, at the determination that reminded him of a young medic who had refused to die in a jungle half a century ago. "Your father," Raymond said slowly. "He would not want me to refuse. Would he?" Vincent smiled through fresh tears. "He would come back from the grave to yell at you if you did." A sound escaped Raymond's throat, something between a laugh and a sob, a sound he had not made in years. a sound that felt like the first crack in a wall he had built around himself when Maria died. "All right," he said. "All right, I will try." The restaurant erupted again. Not applause this time, but something warmer. Murmurs of approval, nods of satisfaction, the sound of a community witnessing something beautiful and wanting to be part of it. Marcus stepped forward, his military bearing still evident despite his dishwasher's apron. "Sir," he said, addressing Raymond with formal respect, "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Marines. I just wanted to say that it is an honor to meet you." He extended his hand. "A real honor." Raymond shook it, feeling the strength in the younger man's grip. The connection between generations of warriors, separated by decades, but united by something deeper than time. "Thank you for your service," Raymond said. The words were not empty. They were recognition, acknowledgement, one soldier to another. "Thank you for yours," Marcus replied, "and for not giving up, even when it would have been easier." Elena returned from the back, her eyes red, but her smile bright. "He is gone," she reported to Vincent. "I made sure he took everything." "Good." Vincent nodded, then turned back to Raymond. "There is an apartment above the restaurant. It was my father's office originally. We converted it after he passed. It is small, but it is warm, and it is yours for as long as you need it." Raymond stared at him. "I cannot accept that." "You can." Vincent's voice was firm. "You will. My father spent 40 years searching for you. He died without ever getting to say thank you. She let me carry him. She let him die. Well, he cannot say it, but I can. Thank you, Raymond. Thank you for giving me my father. Thank you for giving me my life." Raymond's composure finally broke completely. The tears came freely now, decades of grief and guilt and loneliness pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. He covered his face with his hands and wept, and Vincent held him, and the restaurant watched in respectful silence as a man who had carried others for so long finally allowed himself to be carried. Through the window, the night had cleared. Stars were visible above the city lights, the same stars Maria had loved, the same stars Raymond had looked at just last night when he had made his decision to stop running. He had not known, then, what he was walking toward, had not known that the name on the restaurant was not coincidence, but fate, had not known that the son of the man he had saved would be waiting, searching, hoping for exactly this moment. But he knew now, and for the first time in 6 years, Raymond Vance felt something that had been missing since Maria closed her eyes. He felt like he was home. 3 months later, the spring sun streamed through the windows of Bellini's as Raymond set down menus at the corner table. His table now, the one by the window where he had sat that first night, where Vincent had told him about Antonio's life, where everything had changed. He moved differently these days, still precise, still economical in his motions, but without the weight that had pressed down on his shoulders for so long. The new clothes fit him well. Navy slacks, a pressed white shirt, comfortable shoes that did not require duct tape to hold together. His hair was trimmed, his beard neat, his eyes clear in a way they had not been for years. The apartment upstairs had become home. Small, yes, but warm, filled now with photographs he had thought lost forever. Maria on their wedding day, his unit in Vietnam, young faces frozen in a moment before everything changed. And a new photograph, taken just last month, of Raymond and Vincent standing together in front of the restaurant, the Bellini sign glowing above their heads. The lunch rush was building, and Raymond made his way through the dining room with the quiet efficiency he had developed over the past 12 weeks. He was not officially an employee. Vincent had tried to put him on payroll, but Raymond had refused. Instead, he helped where he could, greeting guests, seating regulars, telling stories when customers asked about the photographs on the walls. And they always asked. The door opened, a young man walked in. Late 20s, wearing clothes that had seen better days, carrying a backpack that held everything he owned. His eyes had the hollow look that Raymond recognized. The look of someone who had seen too much and come home to find that home no longer existed. Raymond approached him before the new hostess could intervene. "You looking for a meal or a place to rest?" The young man's posture shifted. Defensive, wary, the automatic response of someone who had learned that kindness usually came with conditions. "Just passing through," he said. "Saw the sign." Thought maybe they were hiring. Raymond nodded slowly. What branch? The young man's eyes widened slightly. How did you know? Takes one to know one. Raymond gestured toward the corner table. Come sit down. Let me get you something to eat, and we can talk. I do not have money for this place. The young man glanced around at the white tablecloths, the crystal glasses, the well-dressed diners. I should not have come in. You are exactly where you should be. Raymond put a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. Trust me, I know what it feels like to stand where you're standing. And I know what it feels like to have someone offer a hand when you have forgotten how to reach for one. The young man hesitated. Then, slowly, he allowed Raymond to guide him to the corner table. Over the next hour, Raymond listened. The young man's name was Derek. 2 tours in Syria with the army. Came home to find his girlfriend gone, his apartment rented to someone else, his family tired of dealing with the person he had become. He had been on the streets for 8 months, bouncing between cities, running from something he could not name. Raymond told him about the bridge, about Maria, about 55 years of carrying a promise he thought he had broken, about standing outside this very restaurant, watching through windows, too afraid to walk through the door. What changed? Derek asked. What made you finally go inside? Raymond smiled. A woman named Elena gave me coffee. A man named Marcus saw me for who I really was. And a man named Vincent reminded me that the people we save have a way of saving us right back. He told Derek about the program Senator Holloway had connected him with, about the veterans organization that had helped him navigate the VA system, finally getting him the benefits and medical care he had been owed for decades, about the community that had formed around him, other veterans helping other veterans, a chain of hands reaching back through darkness to pull each other into light. It is not easy, Raymond said. I will not lie to you about that. Some days are harder than others. Some nights, I still wake up in places I would rather forget. But I'm not alone anymore. And that makes all the difference. Derek stared at his empty plate. The meal had been the best he had eaten in months. Maybe the best he had ever eaten. I do not know if I can do what you did, he said quietly. I do not know if I'm strong enough. You carried a weapon in places most people cannot imagine. Raymond's voice was firm. You watched friends die and kept going. You survived things that would break most men. Do not tell me you are not strong enough. You are here. You are breathing. That is enough to start. The door to the kitchen opened, and Vincent emerged. He spotted Raymond at the corner table and smiled, then noticed Derek and understood immediately. He crossed the dining room and extended his hand. Vincent Bellini, he said, welcome to our restaurant. Derek shook his hand uncertainly. I cannot pay for the meal. I am sorry. I told him I did not have money. The meal is on the house. Vincent pulled out a chair and sat down. All meals are on the house for veterans. That is our policy. Has been since my father opened the first Bellini's in 1977. Your father was a veteran? Vietnam. Vincent glanced at Raymond with warmth that had only grown over the past 3 months. He was carried out of the jungle by the man sitting across from you. 12 miles through enemy territory. That story is why this restaurant exists, and it is why we will never turn away someone who served. Derek looked at Raymond with new eyes. You are the one from the photographs, the one everyone talks about. Raymond shrugged. I'm just a man who kept a promise. Nothing more. That is not what I heard. Derek's voice had changed. Softer now, more open. I heard you were living under a bridge 3 months ago. I heard you walked in here with nothing and walked out with everything. Not everything. Raymond touched his chest, where Maria's photograph now rested in a pocket over his heart. Some things we carry with us no matter where we go. Some people stay with us even after they're gone. But I walked out with something I had lost, something I had given up on finding. What was that? Hope. Raymond smiled. I walked out with hope. The afternoon light shifted, casting golden beams across the dining room. Outside, the city moved in its endless rhythm. People passing on sidewalks, cars flowing through streets, life continuing in its relentless forward motion. But inside Bellini's, time seemed to pause, to hold its breath, to honor a moment that connected past and present, loss and redemption, the weight of promises kept and the grace of second chances given. Vincent excused himself to handle the growing lunch crowd, leaving Raymond and Derek alone at the corner table. They talked for another hour. About war, about peace, about the long road between the two and the people who walked it together. When Derek finally stood to leave, Raymond pressed a card into his hand. An address, a phone number, the veterans organization that had helped him find his way back. Call them, Raymond said. Tell them Spectre sent you. They will take care of you. Derek looked at the card, then at Raymond. Why are you doing this? You do not even know me. Because someone did it for me. Raymond's voice was quiet but steady. Because that is how we survive. Not alone. Never alone. We carry each other. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. Derek nodded slowly. Then, surprising them both, he snapped to attention and rendered a sharp salute. Thank you, sir. Raymond rose from his chair and returned the salute with a precision that had never faded despite the decades. Thank you for your service, soldier. Now go get some rest. And come back tomorrow. We will figure out the next step together. Derek walked out into the spring sunshine, the card clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Raymond watched him go, remembering what it felt like to stand on that threshold between giving up and going on. Still here, brother. The words were a whisper directed at no one and everyone. At Antonio and Maria and all the names in his journal. At every soldier he had carried and every soldier who had carried him. Still trying. Still keeping promises. He turned back to the dining room, to the photographs on the walls, to the life he had found inside a restaurant built on a dream whispered in darkness 55 years ago. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Raymond Vance smiled. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, please consider subscribing to our channel. And right now on your screen, you will see another incredible story waiting for you. Click it, watch it, and remember that every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them might just be legendary, and some of them might just be waiting for someone to see them, to really see them. The way Vincent saw Raymond, the way Raymond now sees Derek, the way we can all see each other if we only take the time to look. Thank you for watching.